Good afternoon, everybody. Lee's back at you with another day. The Wall Street Journal. I got my paper here. I got the real paper. Doesn't have my name on it. I used to get the Wall Street Journal with my actual name and address printed on it, but it's not. I think it gets dropped off by the normal paper guy that delivers the Arizona Republic, one of the worst newspapers. They drop off one of the best newspapers in the world, but it's one of the worst newspapers, Arizona Republic. So I can read that paper in probably 5 minutes. So a few articles today. I'm going to stay out of the Biden mess today. Talk to a few friends on the phone today about it. I may get it tomorrow. Wall Street Journal really has been kind of light around this story, and that's an intriguing position that they've taken around that. But today there was a few things about just noticing that they thought Biden should be commenting on it. It's interesting, talking about it with a few friends of mine, we kind of all agreed that if we were running for the president and they had a dramatic accusation that was made about us, that we would be out there defending ourselves. The Bidens are not. Hunter is gone. I have no idea where Hunter's at. Nobody can find him. They tried to find Jim Biden the other day with a bag of groceries outside his house, and he wouldn't comment and told them leave him alone. And of course, Joe Biden is on the campaign trail slightly and not commenting about it. So I find it very interesting that they believe this story will just go away if they ignore it, and they've ignored it. That goes against the integrity of my family. I know very few families that could let that happen. When you attack my brother and my only son now, because his other son's passed away, Bo. So when you attack my son and my brother, I would have difficulty not responding to it, but he's chosen not to. We have to be careful. That doesn't mean he's guilty, but you got to ask yourself. It's okay to ask yourself questions about why is he doing that. So first article today: the car sector in the U.S. is roaring. Third quarter, the car sales returned to the pre-pandemic. Let me get the comments up here so I can see comments. The pre-pandemic levels, and primarily large trucks and luxury cars. Fiat, Chrysler Fiat reported a $2.7 billion profit third quarter. Ford is $2.4 billion. GM is still, I think, early November, 7th, 8th. Don't quote me, but I think they wait till about November to post theirs. So a huge amount of profit for those two companies, and I got to believe GM is going to come right in there. The caution there, I'd say, and I'd see a lot of this even with the GDP today, it doesn't say how poor people are doing, people at the lower end of the income level, especially when you see large trucks and luxury cars as being the driver. Obviously, somebody making 20, 25, 30,000 a year are not buying those vehicles. They can't buy a $40,000 to $50,000 vehicle on that kind of salary. Well, don't get me started. I guess 7-8 year payments and stuff, there's ways to do it, but generally they don't. So that's good. So it doesn't say how low income people are doing. And I think in a lot of this is recover from the COVID. The low income people have had to keep working in essential jobs and aren't doing as well. And we got to keep that in mind. Number 2 article: Europe starts lockdowns. So Germany and France is returned to lockdowns. No gym, restaurants, bars, non-essential shops. So I digress. I'll digress on that a minute. Work's okay if you can get away from work from home. They want you to, but if you have to go into work, that's okay. So they've really gone back to this lockdown that they used before. They believe successfully. So the argument's got to be is, they used it successfully. What happened? What's going on in Europe? And there are starting to be some people that say maybe it's a new strain, that maybe the COVID is changing. One of the things that they're saying is that it's spreading much faster than it did before. And why is that? I mean, if people had some form of herd immunity before, or some people got over it, and they've got some immunity, why is this thing taking over? By the way, the positivity rate in Europe went from 13.6% of the tests positive to this last week, 18%. Huge. I mean, 18% is almost 1 in 5 people that tested. For every 100 people tested, 20 people are positive. That's a huge number. Now, and by the way, they said the hospitals really are driving, the capacity of the hospitals is driving the decision. And by the way, that's the way it should be. I think we made that clear. I think Trump and the administration in the U.S. made that clear early on, that you had to have lockdowns because you couldn't allow hospitals to be overrun and allow people to die with no health care. I mean, that's, you got to do that. Remember flattening the curve? We've forgotten all about that. We flattened the curve and went back to somewhat normal. So, is that decision correct? We'll see again. But remember, the scientists often looked at Europe and said, their leaders know what they're doing, and they did the right thing, because remember, they had masks and lockdowns, and they followed it very closely, and the cases dropped dramatically. And remember that then you could hear in the U.S. say, see, if we had a president like Merkel in Germany, we would be okay, because they did it right. And I cautioned you at the time. I said, be very careful when you take a complex deal like COVID in a country with all the cultural, all the different differences that we that we have in countries, and take that down and say, well, the leader matters. I think the leader matters very little, and I think this is proof, because we had Europe success. We said, if we can only be like Merkel, and if Trump just was like Merkel and paid attention to the scientists, we'd be okay. And they were wrong, by the way. And now it's come back, and they're much above us in the positivity rate right now. I'd say above the U.S. for those foreigners watching the live stream. So, by the way, it's another area of government edicts and what you want. There's different people. They think the government ought to be able to edict all this, and that's really the way it needs to be done. There's lots of other people that say no, they shouldn't be. I think in some cases, some people ought to go back to Biden and say, no, wait a minute, with the latest information in Europe, has that changed your plan? What are you going to do after you take office to stop this virus? Because that's what he said. And what are you going to do? So, by the way, Europe's a little bit better in that small businesses are going to be paid out. Most small business under 50 employees are going to be paid out at 75% of their lost income. So they will be somewhat, I mean, that's the advantage of a more socialist country, that those people will be more taken care of. Third article, states in crisis. I hope to have a graph up for you this morning, but I couldn't make it this afternoon, but I couldn't make it work. So the states are in a lot of trouble as far as revenue. And what's unusual about this is many of the states are in trouble. So, COVID has created a situation where they've got a drop in revenue coming in from, obviously, taxes, sales taxes. Property tax shouldn't be affected if people can pay it. And by the way, multiple cities are reporting that they're way behind in property taxes because people don't have the money to pay it. So we had to know that was going to happen. They couldn't pay the rent. They're not going to pay their property taxes. So So there's only been two times in the last 100 years of multiple states, almost all the states having a drop in income. And that was September 11th, 2001, and then the 2008 financial crisis. And so that's only two times it's happened. And so it's really different when multiple states are affected. Actually, the way our states are independent, they operate independently, and they have pension liabilities that are different from others. So they have different. Some of them, Alaska, Wyoming, they got gas credits they're getting that help them out, and so a little bit different this time that many states are hitting this. So what's different in the states? And remember, the states can't run a deficit. They have to figure out. I say that with tongue in cheek because they're running a deficit on pensions, and it's a deficit by any other definition. They just don't fund them, and so the debt goes up. So what's different? So first of all, is the inability to adjust quickly to offset dramatic drops in revenue. So it's interesting. I looked at the state labor rate has been reduced 5% since the COVID started. So the states and local governments were a little ahead of that, 6 to 7%. So I got to tell you, as a former manager, and I managed lots of people, a 5% headcount drop is nothing. I could do that in my sleep. And so, that's real easy to do. So my opinion, for whatever it's worth, is that the states haven't done much to drop their head count to react to it. Now, maybe it's very difficult. Obviously, you drop policemen, policewomen. How about fire people? Certain positions are very difficult to drop, but at 5%, I can tell you from experiences they've done very little. So, and unlike private enterprise, now private enterprise has to respond quickly, and if 5% drop doesn't do it, and the next month they still see a drop in the revenue, they got to do another 5%. They got to do something else. Something keeps happening, and you got to go find the revenue. And I've been in those meetings where the vice president brings all the directors in and says, "Look, here's our number. Go, you got the rest of the day or the rest of the morning. Come back at noon, and we'll work late tonight, and we're going to nail this down. And get with your groups and figure out where you're going to get this money from." And it basically no meetings or anything like that off and on and negotiating. You just go get it done. And I still remember getting, managers in a room and saying, "This is what we got to do." And I still remember the arguments, that would come back at me. And I said, "Save the arguments. Yeah, it's a great discussion. I'd love to have them too, but we're past that. That the revenue is not here. We have to do something." Private enterprise does this all the time. Government does not know how to do this. I'm convinced of it. They haven't been trained. Many of them are lifetime government employees, and they say, "You raise the taxes, go fix the revenue. The problem is on the revenue side. Go fix the revenue." And that's exactly what happens. It's all about you look at the school systems in our area. Anytime they have a trouble, it's go fix the revenue side. And so that's where we are. The other observation I'd make is what's different is pension liabilities. And this is really causing a problem with the Congress now, because Congress wants to help out the cities and states, and mainly the states. And of course, many Republicans are saying, no, this is a backdoor way of getting some states out of their pension liabilities. And we're not going to do that because we thought they were stupid to do that to begin with. And we're not going to pay all these, states off for reward them for bad practices. And also, when you do that, for instance, you take a state like Wyoming and Nebraska that doesn't have a pension liabilities, and you say, what we're going to do, because this is federal tax money and debt, federal debt, we're going to take money from you and we're going to send it to those pensioners in Illinois. Okay, because they owe them pensioners a lot of money in Illinois. They promised them a lot of benefits over the years, and they can't keep up now. So we're going to take it from you and give it to them. And I know we're United States. I understand. I get it. There's times where we need to, and I've never complained about helping hurricane victims. out in the South. I've never. It's part of what we do in the States. Our turn may be coming. I don't know about Arizona. We don't have too many things like that, but our turn may be coming, and we ought to help each other. We are a United States of America, but pension liability is a little bit different. And those people have lots and lots of years to try to fix this, and they haven't fixed it. They keep thinking they're going to get bailed out, and they may yet get bailed out. Depending on this next election, they may get bailed out. And so, and the other thing is, and I wish I could show you the chart, but if you look at the chart, a percent increase of revenue over the last 40, 50 years, states have almost year on year, every year, they have a percent increase in the amount of revenue coming in. So they've been lulled asleep because they never have bad years. A farmer learns. A farmer learns every once in a while because, one out of years out of 10, they have a bad year. And so the revenue always increases. They get more money next year than they had this year. And so all they have to do is figure out how to spend it. And so they're not even experienced on the expense side. My gut feel is on a lot of states that you'd have trouble having them explain to you really where their expenses are and where the targets are, where the areas and expenses are that could be cut. So Michigan, to give you the extent of the problem this year, Michigan said, one of the budget directors said, even if he closed 12 departments, state departments, completely down, and by the way, one of them was the education department, the state would still have a $1 billion loss. So 12 departments completely down, that'd be a $1 billion loss. That almost tells you that there is no way for them to do this. And maybe it's time for the federal government to step in. And maybe there's a right way of the federal government to stepping in. I think a lot of Republicans figured that the open-ended checks to states that the Democrats and Pelosi were going to do was not the right method. And I might agree with them. By the way, the total states are down $434 billion by the end of this budget year. That's projected to be $500 billion, okay? To give you a perspective of the pension liabilities, which is a separate number than this, by the way, Illinois' pension liabilities are $230 billion, $250 billion. So, interesting thing on states in crisis. I think you're going to hear more and more on that. Some of them have had loans. I think Illinois and New Jersey, I think, have gotten federal loans that were offered and actually got an extensive loan that way. Loans are putting the problems on our kids and grandkids, but that's what they're going to do. Fourth article, Twitter censors. Well, so this Senate hearing the other day, Facebook, Twitter, and Google was in there, and of course Dorsey was in there for Twitter. Dorsey is that don't know, the one with the long beard, raggedy beard, I guess I'd call it. So he was called in the carpet, obviously, for this Biden story that they killed, and under questioning, he said there was no evidence of Russian disinformation. So he said, regardless of what people are saying about that this was caused by Russians, they don't have any evidence of that. They blocked it because a policy around hacking, that they have a policy that any hacked materials can't be displayed on Twitter. And they believe, erroneously, he said, up front, that and he actually did a very good job of apologizing. Says we did a bad job on this. We thought we did it for the right reason, and we didn't. And he said we've changed our mind on it because we don't consider it hacked material anymore. So so they made that decision. They pulled it out. So a lot of the issues here is, and I'm a user of Twitter. I'm also a user of a Twitter competitor called Parler that has, by the way, has free speech. Parler doesn't pull anything off, and those of you who are not familiar with them. And I send this out to Facebook, I send this out to YouTube, and also to a program called Periscope. And some of you may be watching one or the other of those and may not be aware of all three. I actually can produce simultaneously to all three platforms. But they all have rules. And I got to tell you, and I think I'm not alone in most people that live stream, I don't know what the rules are. It's very, very complicated. It in many cases not very transparent. And the first time you'll run into it is a message that comes up from one of those platforms saying, "We're not letting this go on," and on our platform, and we pulled it off. And then you try to figure out, what did I do on that platform? You got to go look at one of the other platforms to go through it again and try to figure out what possible thing you could have done. But they won't tell you that. They just say you violated our policies. And so they're not very transparent. So they did this badly to begin with, okay? So, I was talking to a friend of mine this morning from Colorado, and we were talking about this and said, I think we can all agree that there's a few areas that ought to be censored, that ought to be pulled off almost any platform. And anything around treason, some things around violence, you can't put up a picture of you killing someone, right? This is not going to happen. And pornography, and we all know what pornography is. So I think we can all agree on that. But what we haven't all agreed on is what these companies are censoring. And so they're non-transparent. And by the way, the different rules. Facebook allowed the Biden story to be up, but they did, how do I say this? They made it not spread as much. There's a better term for this, and somebody can help me, but they downplayed it in their algorithm. So it was still up there. They didn't pull it down, but they didn't allow it to spread very rapidly. Now you say, what's the difference? Maybe it's a difference with a distinction without a difference. So we don't know what they are. They're different for every platform. And the penalty is they pull you off, just pull you off, boom. And then you're sitting out there in la la land trying to figure out what to do. And many people have monetized these and are actually making money off of it. And just for your information, I'm not, and I'm okay with that. I'm retired, and I save for retirement. I'm okay. I'm having fun with this, and I think it's a lot more fun that way. So I give you an example. What people are doing with this, and this is what's really dangerous about free speech. So I'm going to try to give you a story and say this is what can happen. So I watched Scott Adams, and some of you know these Dilbert, creator of the comic strip Dilbert, and another one called Robots Read the News, which I think is a fantastic idea. I love it. So he's on 3 platforms. He's on Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube. And but he's on a 4th platform called Locals. Now, Locals is a pay platform. So if you go and subscribe to somebody on Locals, you have to pay to subscribe. It's not a lot of money. Well, I want to think it costs me $3 to $5 a month, maybe. It's kind of an odd way you pay for it. So that's why I'm having trouble remembering. So what's interesting, Scott's very controversial sometimes. What happens? So what he does is when he wants to become very controversial, what does he do? He moves to one platform, Locals. And he said, guys, don't put this over on other platforms. Don't copy and link to other platforms, because the reason I'm putting it over here is it's controversial, and I want to leave it over here for people who pay to play, right? The subscription model. I really would love to argue with him about that. I think it's a poor example because you're giving in to the censors. But at the end of the day, these are all independent private companies, right? And they're allowed under Rule 230. I'll get to that in a little bit to do that. So we have silos of information. We've developed silos of information. By the way, I could take all that stuff about Biden and put it in a book and publish it and not have any problem whatsoever. Like, as long as a publisher will publish it, right? I got to find a publisher. Well, I could self-publish it under Amazon and Google. So, so the question I always ask, and I asked a good friend of mine this morning, is should they be in the arbiter? I call it the arbiter, or should they be in the censor business at all, or should they have? Should they be looking at a standard that somebody else provides them? Maybe it's a government standard that says these are the areas that we all agree as a society in the U.S. that shouldn't be. This is not free speech, by the way. Whatever these areas are, maybe it's pornography, treasonous, violence of some sort, right? These are to be left off. And so, and then everybody else just follows those guidelines. And there's some private court. A friend of mine suggested something like FISA to go judge those when necessary. When somebody says, "Wait a minute, Twitter published this and they shouldn't have," then you can seek an injunction just like you do anything else, like a newspaper or a private company. You go to court and say, we think they ought to take this down immediately. The judges, impartial, hopefully, should say yes or no and take it to court. So, by the way, this 230, Rule 230, if you read up on that, it protects social platforms, but it really protects them from taking down, obscene, lewd, violent type postings. A lot of people believe that the censorship that especially Twitter did is really, they're really stretching the meaning of Rule 230. So does Rule 230 need to be worked on? I think so. This is not working, right? We all have to admit this is not working. Now, it's interesting enough in the hearing, and this may give you a little bit of feeling about the ideologies. There were many Democrats saying, it's okay that you censored this, but you're not doing enough. You need to do more. Okay, so there were actual senators that said, please do more. It's a dangerous. I hope people really look at that and say that's very, very dangerous, because in a country where we have the right of free speech, that's everything but. And by the way, I challenge them because Rule 230 is owned by Congress. It's their rule. I don't know why they're bringing in these executives from these companies. I think half of them don't understand how the company works anyways and how the censorship works. I think Dorsey was very vague of how it worked, and I think he's way above it and doesn't understand the bowels of how it works. But he's after these private companies when, in fact, this censorship, might be their issue to go solve and go write laws and fix this if you know how to do this. So the issues are, there's no transparency, no rules. What do I do? And so I have to be very careful when in some subjects, when I approach it, I have to figure out, whether I can talk about this subject or not, or do I skirt around it or what? Because again, I don't, and I don't even know, I know very little about the rules, by the way. And I think I'm not on loan there. Last article, Brazil's loggers. So, the Amazon forest is a huge eater of carbon. I call it eater. That's a technical term. And so much of the world wants to preserve the Amazon forest. And we want Brazil to make sure that illegal loggers are not, strip logging this huge forest that really we count on to consume much of the world's CO2. And then so Brazil's come up with this method, and they have these logging preserves, and they'll give one company the right to log that. And typically, I think it's about 500 to 600 square miles to give them, and they give them a license to log that, and they say nobody else can log that land except this company called Amada. And by the way, they'll tell them exactly what trees they're allowed to log out of there and what trees are not allowed. And by the way, there's some trees that are hugely valuable in Brazil. Japanese, Asia loves some of the exotic woods out of that Amazon forest. So I think they're limited to like 12 different species, and there's probably 50 different species. So So, but the illegal loggers have a financial incentive. By the way, the cost um, to log for the illegal loggers is $431 per square meter. The legal ones is over $1,500. And by the way, that the illegal ones can take any kind of wood out of there, and the more valuable wood, the better. So there's an incentive for these illegal loggers to do this on their own, and what they're doing is going into these preserves that's set up for Amada, the company that I'm talking about specifically, and taking their trees out and supporting their families. Now, these are very poor people. This is the only job they know. There's probably not enough job with illegal loggers, and by the way, you don't have to worry about taxes and all that, the other issues that when they're doing this illegally. And so, but one of the things I noticed at the end of the article is there's one patrol agent for 540 square miles. Every 540 square miles, there's one patrol agent to look for illegal loggers. So this is typical government, right? They set up a policy and they set up a license for this logger, but there's no teeth behind it. And they said, they interviewed these illegal loggers. They all talked to the press. They said, we'll never get caught. They don't catch anybody. Never happens. We've never heard any one of our friends get caught and put in jail because of this or fined. So he said, we don't care. We're just going to continue doing what we're doing. So again, poorly thought out. Any poor person that logs for business could have explained this to a government official in about an hour, what's going to happen. And government people could have looked at this and said, here's what we got to do to make sure this happens, and try to keep the illegal logging down. But very difficult to do. And it's, again, like many laws we've had in the U.S., gun laws are specifically a good case in point is we don't back them up. We don't enforce them. The classic one I thought about is, it's against the law to go in and try to buy a firearm from a registered firearm dealer if you're not allowed to buy. You're still on parole or you've got other violations that they've taken your gun rights away from you. It's against the law to do that. What happens if you go do that? Nothing. And generally, 99% of the time, you go in there, they'll say, I'm sorry, we can't sell you a gun. You turn around, walk out. Nobody will come to your door and say, look, you can't do this. And you're going to go to prison 10 days for trying to buy an illegal firearm. So it's a great example of what government doesn't do very well is they don't think the long-term things on how they're going to enforce laws. So hope you've enjoyed the Wall Street Journal today, and have a great day. Thanks again for attending. Cheers.